you can start.
Do we have hello? Do we have our
Sorry about the camera moving around. It's okay now. I'm in position.
And John, do we have all our panelists? Is this on our
That's
you have to get on the yeah. Sorry, it's still that. Yes. John, do we have? No, there's still an echo. Hello?
I can hear you, but the sound isn't great. There's a lot of echo.
Yes. It's still happening. Or it's gone? No, it's still there. I'm sorry for the technical difficulty.
you can talk in the meanwhile, because if it is here, you can adjust this while you're here.
It's very unpleasant there.
I don't think there will be any more.
John, I'm trying to see if our second panelist is there. Yeah, have to unmute. Okay. Is it better this way? No. Oh, that's worse. Hello? Yeah, now we are better. Okay.
That's better.
John, you can hear me, right?
Yeah, that's much better. Thanks.
Huh? John, you can hear me or no? No, he's not
Yes.
reacting, so he cannot hear me.
No, I can hear you fine. Can you not hear me? Are you not hearing me?
Oh, now we can hear you. You can hear me?
Yeah, fine. The echo is okay now.
Okay. I see. John, you have both of your panel list?
No, I don't think I don't see them in the. Of course, I don't know always what name they're connecting with, but I don't see them in the list. Poonam,
Poonam
I
is
do
there?
see. Yes. Hi, Poonam. Nice to see that you're connected. The camera's not on, but you're connected.
And the second one? That.
I didn't see, unless it's an unusual username, I don't think so, no. I didn't see any name that matched.
We must start then.
But sometimes people have aliases, so
Yes.
it's not always clear. But let's start anyway. And
Yeah.
She will join us. We had an exchange last night. She'll join us and we'll be able to intervene when she's ready. So it's time to start. Welcome to this April Roppongi dialogue with the deliberately enigmatic title Family Business, which could mean all sorts of things. And one of our challenges here is to unpack the various things that title might mean, explain why we chose it, and introduce some of the discussions we'd like to have. So Family Business was a title that I suggested half as a joke and half very, very seriously. The joke part is that it's actually the title of a French comedy series, which was quite successful in the last couple of years. There were several seasons during the lockdown period, and it was a very successful comedy of the story of a family, originally a family running a kosher butcher's shop in Paris, who end up through an improbable series of coincidences and strange circumstances becoming significant operators in the cannabis business, illegal cannabis business, of course, operating as a family, and the relationships within the family are central to how they run their business, which is not very well on the whole. Family Business in French was the title of that particular series. But sorry, but if you think about it, the idea of family business is central to a lot of literature and film. The Godfather is the story of family business, with all the peculiar connotations of family in that particular context, if you've read Puzo's novel or seen Coppola's films. Similarly, if recent film that was quite successful and I think got at least someone various awards, House of Gucci is a film about family business. And the point of these films, the comic series Family Business, The Godfather, House of Gucci, and a million others you might care to reflect on, is that the family dimension and the business dimension don't just qualify one another accidentally. They are intimately imbricated. The business dimension of doing things together as a family for economic benefit, and the family dimension of working out relationships, including emotional relationships, relationships of domination and exploitation and cruelty, through the medium of the business enterprise, is the whole point of these imaginative constructions, at least one of which, of course, is based on many aspects of a true story. And this takes us back to the very beginning of this series of Roppongi dialogues. Some of you might have participated in the very first one back in November, when we were discussing Hegel's old, interesting, and sometimes rather strange ideas on the family as the first ethical moment of collective life. Family, then civil society, then state. And making the family an ethical moment in the construction of society and personhood and culture, Hegel emphasizes very interestingly the importance of property, of monetary relationships, of managing the family as a business, in particular for the benefit of children. Hegel, of course, was writing a long time ago. He's not exactly in tune with 21st century ideas, but he was also in his day something of a progressive who emphasized in ways that were not typical of the thought of the late 18th, early 19th century in Europe or North America, the importance of recognizing children as free ethical beings with a role within the family, not limited to providing free labor for their parents. There's a whole paragraph which explicitly dismisses that idea, which was very common in the Germany of his time. So we have a complex web of relationships here, which cover probably at least three sets of issues. The first set of issues is how economic relationships operate within a family, one dimension of which is the collective management of property in the broad sense, including both tangible property and the intangible kinds of property that can be related, for instance, to reputation and social capital. It's not exactly that one will want to say that a family is a business, or at least if we were to say that, there would need to be a lot more analysis of exactly what that would mean. But certainly there are business issues, issues about the maintenance of assets, issues about the production of growth, issues about the transmission of wealth over time that are not accidentally connected to family relationships, but actually inherently part of them. Particularly, and this is one of the things we would like to emphasize in this dialogue, when the relation to those economic relationships is unequal, where family members have very different rights and duties, very different opportunities to participate in the economic life of the family and to benefit from it, including, and we'll come back to this in the discussion, the very troubling cases where some family members um, basically embezzle the family, make inappropriate use of the resources that belong in principle to the family as a whole, in principle, not just philosophically in the terms of Hegel, but also legally in many regimes of communal property. And having used that communal property for inappropriate purposes of all kinds, everything from waste to addiction to theft to all unwise investments, all the things you can think of, because the property is communal, are actually largely protected against the consequences of their action, even though others are suffering. Secondly, alongside the fact that a family is, among other things, a web of economic relationships, there is the fact that businesses are very often, as an observable fact about the world we live in and have been for a very long time, essentially it's no coincidence, for instance, that so many businesses are called XYZ and Sons. It used to be the standard format for creating a business, and you can still see many examples of businesses that still carry that kind of nomenclature. The whole point of a business being to create an enduring intergenerational relationship, often between a father and his sons, but not necessarily limited to that, that was not just about creating a framework for economic prosperity or growth or whatever, but also creating a business framework for a family to flourish through its business enterprises. And all around the world, many businesses, perhaps most businesses statistically, are in one way or another family businesses, which means that the business dimension of the family isn't just internal to family management of collective property, but also externally embedded in the economy to which families relate. And even very large companies, as you know, can be family companies. There are examples of privately owned family firms with billion-dollar revenues in most economies of the world, billion and multi-billion-dollar revenues. And then there is the set of connections between these two things, which are both empirical connections, I've already mapped them, but also connections that raise conceptual issues and also legal, practical, institutional issues. What does it mean for a family, the members of the family, to think of themselves, among other things, in economic terms, whether or not they have a specific family business to run together in the legal economic sense, or whether more metaphorically the family is, as I explained, and as everyone recognizes, even if we don't always talk in these terms, something like a business enterprise for the common prosperity of the family members. And conversely, management literature is full of references, sometimes metaphorical, sometimes slightly more literal, to issues that belong within the framework of the family and are projected on to the management of businesses, even in the absence of any genealogical or legal family relationship. The same thing is true of politics, of course, and we could have a parallel discussion about how metaphors derived from the family serve as a political unconscious that has powerful implications. The figures of the father of the nation, the mother of the people, or Big Brother, to take a very famous example from the literature, just show how the language of family relationships serves as a set of frameworks and metaphorical contexts within which we set, almost without thinking about it, a wide range of other kinds of relationships, among which the business relationships of the firm are typical. So the point of this dialogue is not to cover all of that. It's to concentrate on one quite specific angle within this complex set of relationships, but I thought it was useful precisely because we won't be going into detail on the other parts of this set of issues, to just set the stage by giving a reminder of how complex and multifaceted the relations between families and businesses are. What we would like to concentrate on, and what I would like to invite our first speaker, Poonam Das, to consider from the perspective of Indian law, in particular, the legal issues that arise in India and govern the various aspects of these relationships, is the question of the rights and duties of family members with respect to family property, broadly understood. And exactly what constitutes property and what makes it family property is, of course, both a conceptual challenge and a very practical legal challenge. We chatted about this yesterday in order to prepare this dialogue, and it's clear that there are many very interesting issues there regarding rights and duties between spouses, but also the rights of children within a family relationship with respect to the management, typically by adults, their parents or other adults, of family property. Poonam, if you're ready, I'd like to give you the floor and invite you to give us your thoughts on the economics of family life.
Sure, sure. Thank you, John. Thank you very much. And I'm glad to be part of this. And of course, this is a untouched discussion within the family, among the system, members of the society, or even the law. Nobody wants to talk about the nuances of a family and the disputes that arises between the family unless and until it is taken to the level of adjudication or a dispute or to a court or to an arbitrator, to a conciliator, mediator. But if we as a family, which has a more emotional meaning in India, we are not that economically attached, but we are first emotionally attached. The Indians are emotional fools. So our family bonding is more emotional than economical. A child is bound to his parents on an emotional basis more. But so am I audible now, Mr. Williams?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. No, I just got a chat that I'm not audible, so that is why
It's actually much better when you hold the mouthpiece that way. Your voice is much clearer and more distinct.
Sure, and I'll do this way only. So what happens? So the family in India, it is understood in two ways. It's either joint family or a nuclear family. So when it's a joint family, it's like grandfather, great grandfathers, and then the system runs down to the children and their children. So when and of course, the uncles and the aunts, they all are staying in one accommodation, one house. That's called a joint family. So when you are in a joint family, everybody is expected to work and contribute to the finances or the economic system of the family so that families can run smoothly. It is unsaid, it is unwritten, the rights and duties, but everybody is under an obligation to do their duties. It is expected, and it is never said or written down anywhere. It's not a written document what is the duty of a father, what is the duty of a mother. Emotionally or by way of responsibility, they are doing it. Children are not burdened with the finances of the family. They are not made part of it. It is not discussed with the children, but the adults who are working, they are expected to contribute. When you are in a joint family, it can be the business of the family where everybody is working, or they are running their separate businesses and they can contribute to the economics of the family by running their separate businesses. Everybody has equal right when it comes to property as per law. But when it comes to practicality, the daughters are left out. The daughters are left out on the condition that it's a very typical mindset in India. that if you are getting a daughter married and you're gifting everything during her marriage, that part of property or share she has already got. So nothing, when the partition happens or nothing happens, anything will go to the daughter. But now the law has changed. There has been amendments to the statute. So this mindset developed from where? It developed from the statute, which says property diverges from father to sons, 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 sons. So everywhere it is a masculine gender which has been used. So that's why everything goes to the son when it happens. Coming back to the economic part, in a joint family, what we say, as John said, family is a business. Yes, family is a business. The more the hands in the family, the more the income in the family. So family is a business. There is one manager who is called Karta under the Indian law, who looks after the affairs of the family, delegate works to the members of the family, and try to utilize the finances of the family for the well-being of the family. Who is getting education, who is not getting education, why not, till what extent, what can be the expense to be given to that person for his own personal expenses, and what goes to the household expenses, everything is done by Karta or the female of the family. So this is how a joint family works. But when the joint family there is a dispute, then people go for partition and they ask for the share in the property, which is given as per the act law of the land. But in a nuclear family, it's a small family, it's husband, wife, and children. There is no karta as such, but the husband or the wife can play the role of the karta. They are the both two persons who contribute to the economy of the family. They both have responsibilities. Again, it is unsaid, unwritten, but if both are working, they both have to contribute. They both have to see that the expenses of the family are met. They both have to see that the children are going to the school and the expenses are being met by either of the parent or both parent by making a common pool. When the problem starts when one of the partners is, why should I be taking that much of expenses? Then there comes the problem where the children face. For example, if a husband and wife are staying separately, the husband says, I'm not going to discharge the responsibility of being a father. I will not pay for their expenses, their school expenses. Why? Because they are not staying with me. But you are a father, you have the responsibility. It's your family. Even if you are separated, even if you are divorced, even if your children stay far from you. No, I am not going to do that. Then there comes the legal position in India is, then the wife or the children or the guardian of the children can file a case of maintenance. They can ask for their legal right. You being the father or you being the mother are under an obligation to pay for our school fees, for extracurricular activities, for our sustenance. So you have to pay the maintenance. So children rights, though they are never part of the discussion, though they are never part of the decision making process, how much money should come into the family and where it should be expended, but their rights are definitely protected under the Indian laws. Even a child in the womb, if he has been has been conceived and he is there in the womb and a partition takes place in a family, a certain portion of shares or certain portion of property is kept for him. He has a right. He has already made a right by, though not still unbirth, but by coming into the life, a right flows to him. So this is how the right of a children is protected. The courts are there, the Child Protection Act is there, the Transfer of Property Act is there, where the court act as a guardian to protect the right of the child. If if parents go to the court arguing, asking for divorce, fighting over property, the court is there as a guardian, as a supervisor to see that the child's rights are protected. It's just not distributed among the parents or parties. But the minors under the age of 18, the minors are protected. They're getting their right. So family, first of all, is a very it's a very ancient concept in India. It's a sacred concept in India. Family means you have to stay together, and nobody should question what is my right, what is my share. The moment you start this question, there is disputes goes on, and the emotional balance is disturbed. In India, family are run more on emotions rather than on economics. But yes, they all are expected to contribute to the economy of the family as if they're running a business. John, have I been able to?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll obviously be asking you some questions later and ask you to come back into the discussion. It's interesting that you make the contrast between emotions and economics. And just a reminder, since we started with Hegel in this series of dialogues, that Hegel grounds the idea of the family in love. He also grounds the idea of the family in property. And the whole point of his philosophy is to try to combine together those two apparently conflicting perspectives of the family as a primarily emotional nexus and the family as a primarily economic unit. And his claim, as often in his philosophy, is it's not either or, it's both. But of course, the connection between the two is tricky. And I'll be very interested to ask you some follow-up questions. First, on how these things work in practice, in your view. And secondly, what, if anything, might need to change in the legal framework in response to how real families live their lives in the modern world. But before coming back to you, I'd like to open the discussion a little bit. Sonia, has Talin joined us or not? I don't see her name in the participants, but maybe she has an alias. Okay, I can't hear you, Sonia, so I don't know what the situation is, but
it doesn't seem like we can reach her. Maybe she has some technical problem.
So she can join us later, no problem. I'd like to open the discussion a bit, and indeed, Sonia, if you're willing, I'd be very interested in your very brief thoughts, not a whole presentation, but just your comments on what you've been listening to so far. And then I'd also like to ask Darina, who's been a regular partner in this series of dialogues, for her thoughts, perhaps questions also for Poonam. So what would you like to put on the table at this stage?
It was very interesting to hear Poonam's thoughts growing up in India, so I could relate to how she views the family is very much how I see it, and having left India as a teenager, but still the values that are instilled in you and in a child, that became much clearer to me by listening to Poonam. And that's some of the discussions that I have done with you, John, and rest of the team as we are putting together this program, is the idea of family is beyond an individual. It's not about just the two people who started the family. It's about everybody who is in the family. So the start is emotional, but it's also emotions of everybody who is in the family. So that's why I always bring the comparison to very contemporary mindset that family is if we don't take in the Indian, we use the word family is a very sacred idea for Indian, or very emotional idea. And in the West, we could say from the church, very moral idea. And in the contemporary mind, that seems too ancient. Then I bring it up. Then family is a legal institution. It's just no different than a corporation, where we have provided many different structures for people to have different types of bringing themselves together, from a corporation to sole proprietorship. So family is closest to a corporation. And you brought about earlier, John, defense of rights of everybody inside a family. It's if one person takes the resources that belong to the whole family, and Poonam brought that up too, then it's embezzlement. And this is where our whole project is about protection of rights of all the members equally, and also an opportunity for everybody to have this institution that's at the very beginning, as Hegel said, of our ethical life, to provide the space for fulfillment. So that's my gist of the idea of family for me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Darina, thank you again for joining us in this dialogue as a participant. And we like to have an interactive discussion, make it a bit dynamic. What are your thoughts on the various ideas that have been raised in order to get our discussion started? Darina, are you there? I saw you online earlier. Have you been disconnected? Things can happen technically, of course. But Darina's still in the participants list. Okay, maybe there's a technical problem. So while waiting for Darina to get her network back, are there any other comments at this stage? Please
John?
feel free. Yep.
I would like to bring your attention to Professor Yoshimi Shunya. Yoshimi-san, you have met him at one of our conferences at UNESCO, and
Yes.
to get a Japanese perspective, being a professor of sociology on family.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting and introducing me. And but I've just come here, so I don't know what you've been talking about because I have another meeting just before now. So I've just come here, so I'm very sorry. So I maybe I need to catch up with you, but roughly speaking, in my impression, because today's topic is family business, so I wonder because as I'm a sociologist, so from a sociological point of view, the relationship between the family and the business is very much, in my sense, it seems to be very complicated, because the concept of family is more closely connected with the concept of community. So community and family shares a value and shares everything, maybe many of the things. On the other hand, the concept of business is more closely connected with, roughly speaking, market. And market, the basic logic of market, it might be exchange something from the person A and person B. So theoretically or logically, if we discuss about the connection and how to say relationship between the family and the business, we need to discuss about how we can manage or manage the relationship between community and the market, or the practice of sharing and practice of exchange. This is my very basic understanding about the relationship between the family and the business. But again, I'm very sorry because I've just come here. I've just come here, so I don't know almost nothing about what you have been talking about.
So sorry to put you on the spot, but
Yeah.
where we were trying to bring your attention is the family is also organized almost like a business, because all the resources have to be shared for the well-being of everybody inside the family.
Yes, yes. So I want to talk about, or I wonder, I want to know how we can manage the relationship between sharing and exchange.
Thank you. I think that's a really interesting point, and I'd like to comment briefly on it, because it goes back to the point that I was making about our grandfather Hegel, since we adopted him as the starting point for this discussion once again. I think the fact that the family is anchored in love and at the same time in economics is a paradox for the reason you indicate, because the two dimensions of the family seem to point in different directions. On the one hand, the direction of an emotional nexus where it would be almost rude to talk about money, to talk about accounts, to talk about wealth and its preservation. And on the other hand, the fact that survival for some people or prosperity for others actually demands that questions of money within the family be taken very seriously. And those tensions, as we all know from our own family lives, can sometimes be very complicated. And indeed, one of the interesting findings from some of the sociological and anthropological studies about these issues is the extent to which, given the importance of financial issues for family life, the importance of property and pensions and salaries and taxes and debts and so on, people probably spend far less time than they rationally should talking about those issues within the family, precisely because, as you said, the family mindset is communitarian and lends itself to an idea of sharing that seems to conflict with the introduction of rational economic thinking. And that tension, which is not a legal tension, but more an emotional and anthropological tension, I think is very much connected to the legal issues that Poonam was talking about earlier. Because of course, if everyone was completely rational about these things, then family life could be contractualized and it would be quite easy to resolve the conflicts. It's precisely because family life is only imperfectly formalized that conflicts and tensions can arise at the frontier between the emotional nexus and the economic logic. So I think your comments, even if you sort of took the train when it was already moving, were very relevant.
Yeah, I agree, and I totally understand. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Has Darina managed to reconnect, or is she still technically challenged for the moment? This happens a lot in our online meetings, of course.
John,
Darina, you're back.
I'm here.
Nice to see you.
Sorry, yes, me too. Actually, maybe we can go back to the idea other than looking at the family as from, the socio-economic status, or maybe we can go further into discussing how we can, because when we talk about a family and we say that we should run it like business, or like we run a company, it can tend to be a bit not shocking, but a bit strange. Especially when it comes to ethics, because we're comparing here something that has a relation, or is linked to values, to ethics principles, and then you are comparing it to a business. Although in business we have ethics, we have and so on. But maybe if we can proceed with trying to see how could be running a family could look like running a business, and see what are the the pros and cons of this. I mean, we know very well that, for example, in a business or in a company, we have to set like a strategy. We have to have goals. We have to have our projects, our programs, everything. And for a family also, we can also have like a plan for 3 or 5 years plan for a family, but we have to make sure that also all the members of the family know what are these goals, are they aware of that, are they all participating in this. A family also can have an action plan, like a business can have it. Do all family members know what are, for example, how important are the goals for the family? How could be, for example, all these things based on the human behavior, not only what's going on around us, the environment. So all these ideas, we can maybe discuss these to compare running a business and running a family, and see how we can confirm or not confirm whether running a family looks like running a business or a company. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I was thinking when you mentioned ethics, and thank you for doing that, because of course it's one of the key words of this whole series of events, of dialogues, is the question of care. And it's interesting how in current ethical discussions, the notion of care has become central to a lot of considerations. Sometimes in terms of a contrast between an ethics of care and a more utilitarian ethics of goal-oriented rationality, for instance. But what's interesting in what you were saying, echoing what was said earlier, is how one way of thinking about care is precisely as a bridge between the two sets of concerns, because care has two frameworks or two spaces of connotation. On the one hand, care implies a unilateral relationship of commitment and responsibility based on an emotional connection. But on the other hand, including in the business world, particularly in terms of currently fashionable ideas about economic and social and environmental responsibility, for instance, care also becomes a modality of goal-oriented thinking. And what connects the two is the idea of a duty to care, or a duty of care. Who has a duty of care with respect to what? And framing the question in that way actually combines, quite interestingly and quite problematically perhaps, the two dimensions of communitarian thinking and rational market thinking, as was mentioned earlier. I'm very pleased to welcome Taline Tamiziani to the dialogue. I know you've only just joined us. It might be too early for you to want to intervene. You might want to listen to a few things first, and that's fine. Just let me know. But I'm delighted you're here, and we'll give you the floor when you feel ready. Would you like to speak now, or maybe listen for a bit before intervening?
Yes, maybe listen for a bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
In that case, I'd like to come back to you, Poonam, and give you the opportunity to respond and react to the things that have been said so far, including the two questions I suggested, and which I'll just restate. First question: do you feel that the law, as you described it, in India, currently does the job for which it's designed? First question. And secondly, is it the right job? In other words, are there issues that, even if the law is working well in its own terms, might raise questions that might call, for instance, for legal reform? And as Sonia might wish to say again later in the discussion, one of the ambitions of the Dil and Mati Foundation in connection with these dialogues is to think about issues of legal change and legal reform in this area in light of all the discussions we're having about the various aspects of the ethics of family life. So what do you think? Does it work? Does it need fixing?
Second question, I got the second question. Can you repeat the first question, John?
The first question is the law doing the job for which it was designed? Does it work well in its own terms? And then the second question, do you think the terms are adequate? The questions are connected, of course, but what are your thoughts?
Of course, I'll take them together. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll take them together. Yes, the law was working, has worked well in the past, till the time new concepts, new framework, new economic situations had not come into existence. For example, as I said earlier, there was no right to property or right to inherit by the daughters. It was not there. When there was a partition happening in the family, the daughters were not getting anything because they are married and they have gone to a separate family. So they lose their right. Once you get married, your there is a word called gotra in India, in the Hindu system, Hindu religion. So your gotra is changed, so you can't claim anything out of the property. But now the law has changed. There has been amendments by the courts. Judicial interpretations have been taken into account by the executive. And now the daughter has an equal right in the property. So secondly, there was, when you say family, so when a man is having a second home or a second wife or illicit children, which we say illegitimate children because they are born out of the are not born out of the wedlock, the law has changed to protect their rights also. They are considered to be part of the family, and their rights are being protected, even if not the woman, but yes, of the children. So there is a developing, I say evolving. The Indian laws are still evolving and changing as per the circumstances. Earlier, it was joint family, there was a co-partner, there was co-partner property, there was a karta. People never used to get to the court level. Any dispute was to be solved at the family level. The elders used to sit and discuss and then divide the property as per their share of earnings or the duties and who has contributed what to the family. But now, if somebody is unhappy with the way the family is being run, somebody's right is being jeopardized, then they approach the court. Two brothers are fighting, two sisters are fighting. They approach the court, and court is absolutely doing justice. And if there is a change required in the system, the courts are suggesting, are striking down sections or principles in the legislations, and then are recommending new laws or laying down new laws, which is taken up by the executive by amending the statutes, the current statutes. So yes, the law has been catering to the needs, and it's changing and evolving to cater needs to the upcoming generations. You're muted.
Sorry, my apologies. My microphone got muted. What's your judgment as to future directions? Are there key areas where you think the law is perhaps lagging behind society or not responding to the needs of society? Is there perhaps one key change that you would like to see in this area?
Not really. As I said, in India, the family is based on emotional values more. Even the marriage is regarded as a sacred institution. It is regarded as 7 lives, a bond for 7 lives. So anybody who wants to get separated is first counseled till the time they are really separated. So changing the whole belief system, it'll take time. Of course, one thing I would say that there has to be some law where the children don't have to fight for their rights. There should be something written down in law which says even if the parents are separated, the parent is obligated to pay. Matlab, even the child not approaching the court, although it is written that he should be doing it, but for the child has to approach a court through his mother or father. So that is where I think that there should be something in writing. Something should be codified to protect the children more. Although they are protected, they are taken care of, but in a more codified manner rather than just left out. Whosoever will go, will see, let them approach, we will see to it. So this approach I think has to be changed somewhere. And for the adults who want to willingly part ways, they should not be mandated, to give it a run, give it time to, maybe it will pass by and we can be together. There is a waiting period of 6 months. There is a time limit to file an application. So these should be done away with, because with the developing and evolving society, dynamics are changing faster than our laws. Our laws are lagging behind there.
Thank you. That's a very interesting point. It's striking that in the two countries where I know the legal system best, the UK and France. Well, the UK is technically not a country in legal terms because there are several legal systems, but let's forget those details. Something has been done in recent years in the UK over a decade ago, in France quite recently, specifically in the direction of what you suggest. Traditionally, in the case of divorce settlements that required a financial payment by one spouse to the other, statistically almost always from a divorced man to a former wife for the upkeep of children. As you say, when for whatever reason the spouse was in default on the payments, it was for the injured party, the spouse who should have received the payment, to make a legal claim. In both countries I mentioned, this has now shifted to a system where a public service provides payment in lieu of the defaulting spouse, and then takes the necessary legal steps to reclaim the money from the defaulting spouse. So effectively putting the state as a mediator in that financial relationship post divorce, which is an interesting change, which is, I think, very much in the spirit of what you just indicated. Of course, it's often seen as an intrusion in family life by the state, which is also interesting, because opening up the family to that kind of legal regulation, administrative regulation, is sometimes seen as an interference. As the proverb goes in many languages, dirty linen should be washed within the family. But of course, doing the dirty linen washing within the family reflects unequal power relationships within the family, and can therefore be unfair and perhaps even fundamentally dangerous to the more vulnerable members of the family.
So where we have to get our economic rights secured, the moment finances are involved, dirty linen has to be washed in the public.
Yeah, absolutely. I will put also on the table, I don't know if you saw in the chat, my former UNESCO colleague Camille Guinet raised the question of cultural and geographical differences in this area, which I'd like all of you to think about. This is one of the paradoxes we've been working with from the very beginning of this series of dialogues. At one very general level, the idea of the family is pretty universal, but the social and legal and cultural forms of the family are highly diverse across time and space. And indeed, Poonam, you just referred to some changes in India, for instance, with shifting social practices leading to changing legal issues. And the question of how we can think about these issues in general terms, given that sheer diversity of arrangements, legal arrangements, cultural frameworks, historical traditions, and so on, is obviously very challenging. Even within Europe, even within Western Europe, there are quite considerable differences between different kinds of legal frameworks for family relationships, anchored in the differences between the common law tradition and the civil law tradition, in the differences between nuclear families based on independence of adult children from their parents, and more lineage-based families where adult children still have relations of legal dependence on their parents so long as they're alive. And those differences are within the very small space of Western Europe. So if you take the whole planet, obviously the differences are even greater. So let me put that one on the table. Obviously, Kemi, if you want to comment orally on what you put in the chat, you're very welcome to do so. And Taline, can I give you the floor now? Do you feel you've got up to speed?
Yes, yes, thank you first. I mean, I don't have necessarily the research as equivalent to your knowledge. Just like to say that first, because but I have my ideas about this subject for a very long time, which coincidentally I even have an artwork called Nuclear Family Less, which is hilarious because I think first to understand the law is the law, and our humanitarian understanding of family and individuals is another thing completely, I think. Also East and West. I can just from my perspective say that between the East and West, there's so much. I live both actually, and coming from Middle East and very patriarchal society, me being even in an inheritance situation, coming to the West and almost questioning what is family again at this time of the century. It's very, very important, I think, to redefine. It reminds me, or I can draw parallels to say, how do we define death these days, as in dying? 200 years ago was another definition, 10 years ago another definition. So when the heart is stopped, when the brain is stopped, you know, you have all that. So what is the family? It's we are living in a very individualistic society, first of all. And having a discussion with Sonia earlier made me think that I think moral responsibility as individuals is the core of all this, regardless to any governmental, legal, societal, all that. And what is society? Is there a society? We create society. Like Krishnamurti said, actually, that we invented the society, and we made it as lousy as we are as individuals, actually, because we forced those, you know, principles or no principles on that society. So I'm approaching it not from your very, let's say, advanced legal or informational place, but from more philosophical place. And I think again, and I think if I'm a good person, I'm a good human being, and I would naturally be in a good term or in a fair term with the rest of the members of so-called the family. I've been even in a divorce, and I understand how important that is if we need protection. You know, I'm aware of a lot of women, females who work, they're independent, they would say, I don't need this settlement, I don't need this, or I'm not interested in this. But then also the reverse, where it's very badly taken advantage by women. You know, this is the reverse case of what we're talking about. Some women are really vulnerable, but on the other hand, there are women who do it as their business model, you know, marrying into. So it's just that exactly comes back to the integrity of the person themselves and how the law is interpreted. You know, I find it in the UK, as you said, UK, yes, it's not a country, but generally this part of the world, I think it's a little bit more fair to, you know, how it's actually organized. I find patriarchal society is a little bit complicated. Me being initially in one, where normally when you said the male gets everything or the best or the most, etc., it's not often the case, because the mother gets most often also, the actual wife. I'm talking in situations where there is death involved, legacy, not divorce necessarily. But all that kind of Syria, Middle East, etc. But I have a very different kind of perspective on all this. I think it goes back to the point saying, if we are educated morally and emotionally in the correct way, I don't think these will be as much problems in the future. But the problem is the entire disintegration of, individual versus society, etc. So that's my take on this. But and apologies if that's not very much of what you expected. So, and that's so far what I think about all this. So,
Thank you very much. Of course, you've given everyone the strong desire to see the artwork you mentioned. Is there a picture you can share?
yes, it's actually, this is in a private collection in Munich, but I will find it now. It's actually, here we go. I can share my screen, or how can I send this? I can't
think the
share.
host needs to authorize you to share
Your,
share
yeah,
your screen.
you can share your screen.
One moment, I'm just going to go to the, yes, here we are.
Yeah, we
Great,
can see you.
thanks.
Yes. So this is actually well, now it's in Germany. It's work on papers, many layers of papers with different sensitivities and thickness and transparencies. Of course, it's conceptual and symbolic. The centerpiece is the core, is the nucleus, but it's also representative of the heart, but in a very, very small dot. It's all the blocks and all the realities that we face. That's generically, and the surrounding, it's the universe. However, there is a piece of little plastic, it's actually a construction material from a building site, the black little almost beehive there. And that is the family and the individual and the nucleus all separated from each other. That's how I was feeling, especially after my divorce. Actually, I felt very much that we're individual floating on our own at the end, so it's quite a sad one, because it's almost like losing your family without losing them. So they're alive, but you lose them, or especially that my father was dead. So this is the artwork, and this is one of the, in fact, most favorite of a lot of conceptual art collectors for I don't know, whatever reason. So that's the work. So I don't know what you think of it, if it makes sense to you. Sonia.
It does. I can see why it's a
You
favorite.
do very well when you're talking about these ideas through your art. So it's the chance for you to express the way you were expressing to me more openly by picking up your art and talking about it.
Yes, absolutely. That's my job. And I talk visually, and yes. Okay, so I will stop share. Perfect. Here we go.
Thank you.
Okay.
No, what's very striking about that artwork is precisely the hexagons, the beehive structure outside the frame, and I think that's a very striking image. As you explained, it's sort of something that's been maybe expelled from the frame or floating outside it, but still touching it, connected to it. So with a kind of little umbilical cord. So that's actually, quite a powerful image, I think. Now, one question I also wanted to put on the table, not specifically because of what you said, but also it's in the title of the work you just showed, is that the word family has two quite different connotations in different kinds of societies. I referred to it myself a moment ago. The idea of the nuclear family as composed of parents who are an independent unit and children attached to those parents is an idea that is absolutely central in Hegel. And again, we started with Hegel, so it's good to keep in mind that rather arbitrary starting point. But of course, ideas of the family can also be much more connected to extended families, to lineages. They can include multi-generational households and connections to cousins, uncles, aunts, and so on. And depending on how you extend the family to think about it, some of the implications of the economics of the family can obviously become quite different. And well, your title invites thought on that. Maybe you have some thoughts to share on that now.
I do, because in fact, I'm just going to speak from two perspectives. One is my personal perspective. One is just going to give a very unexpected example of a royal family, for instance, that I know. And the way they talk about family, it's very Middle Eastern, it's very close, it's very hierarchical. The brothers, the sisters, the mother, how they actually interact. It's very, it has its basis in religion very much, and religious teaching, and at the same time financial hierarchies. Even conversations are dictated by a hierarchy of sorts, and it's not necessarily royal because of royal only, but because of the very let's say Middle Eastern, very or very patriarchal, let's say. It's not necessarily a negative thing, but it's a bit like everybody has their role. It's very defined, it's very codified. But now even these people are feeling the pressures of, okay, the new generation, or they don't want to get married, or how are we going to divide the family? Oh, the brother is going to take care of, oh, you're not. It's very confusing to them, the new society structures or new interactions of what's happening. So that's something for me, I just wanted to shed light, because they just represent a lot of groups of people, not just the royal family. In my experience, I think the more I'm quite, let's say, as I said, spiritual and awakened person, and I believe that we can form our new families outside. And for me, blood and lineage is not necessarily dictating that. I personally have situations where I told cousins to never ever contact me again, and finding new friends who I felt much more connection, much more honesty and integrity and love and sharing, and I adapted them as my new family. Now, when I say that, I talk from very different perspective to what you're saying. Rights, legal rights, responsibilities, money. This is super important in this conversation. I understand that. Rights in terms of the way people actually respect or disrespect each other, husbands and wives, etc. But I also understand, again, when you have two families, old family, new family, and they're all in harmony, it's just because the persons and the people are decent and nice people. It's not because the law is telling them necessarily. The law can say a lot of things and people will always bypass it in certain ways or show their animosity in another way. So that's my view. So that said, I don't deny my mother or my brother. I love them. They're my family, but I don't necessarily have this urgent feel to be like my family and everybody else is outside of that. I don't have that. I find all humans, kind of humans, and it's a very, very kind of different perspective. And it sometimes I follow Krishnamurti's teachings, and I kind of, for me, it's very important to think that way, but that doesn't undo what all of you are talking about, of course, because there are millions and millions of people who need that structure and who need that support. For instance, when I was getting divorced, from personal kind of history, I said to my mother and brother, I don't want you to interfere. I need some time on my own to deal with this on my own. And I don't want your criticism towards this, because in Middle East, that's a very big criticism, because you're almost guilty to divorce. And they did leave me alone. And later on, and I decided to take very different new perspective on even divorce. So I decided to build a new kind of friendship with this person I divorced, despite all the efforts for him to be very angry. I just didn't let it happen. So peacefulness was my weapon, and I succeeded. So that proves that individually how we deal with it eventually forces the whole structure. Calling the lawyer saying, please don't do anything nasty. It's very, you know, it's very unlike what everyone almost does, but I decided to take that approach. It's very difficult because everyone around you is against you, but actually it works on the long term, and it's very peaceful. It's very nice, actually. So that's my take on everything. So if that helps, I don't know.
It does, of course it does. It's a conversation, and it's enriched by everyone sharing different kinds of things. And I just like to echo two of the things you said to keep the discussion moving, and maybe others might wish to react to that. One is your reference to royal families, and of course in royal families, of course, there are issues of money, but issues of status are even more important, of course. And it's a reminder that what is true of royal families is true of many kinds of families, where status is one of the things that is collectively managed. And of course, 200 years of romantic literature and film remind us that marrying up or marrying down is a big deal. The novels of Jane Austen dramatize this in Regency England in very striking ways, and it keeps coming back as a trope. And that's just a reminder that the intangible assets managed by a family are sometimes as important as the tangible assets. And of course, the classic romantic heroine is a young girl who has more intangible assets than tangible assets, and that is both her opportunity and her tragedy. The second thing you made me think of is a well-known French proverb. There are variants in other languages as well. The French say, "On choisit ses amis, pas sa famille." You choose your friends, not your family. And effectively, your reference to the idea of choosing a family, in other words, of rethinking the family around friendship rather than around the traditional legal frameworks, is very much in tune with contemporary thinking, very much breaking with traditional thinking, of course, and perhaps one of the interesting ways of thinking about how legal relationships could or should evolve to take account of these shifts of social practices and mindsets and ways of thinking, recognizing, of course, that they vary considerably from country to country. We had a previous dialogue focusing on issues in Japan, for instance, and it's very clear that Japanese society in that respect is still more traditional than British or French society, for instance, where social practices have changed considerably. Kemi, would you like to say anything live in connection with the question you put in the chat? Any additional comments or follow-up? Do you feel it's been answered, or would you like to rephrase or restate it?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
No, I don't really have other comments to add. Just I was very interested by what the first panelist said, and I just thought about this, you know, this inheritance taxes that is very different in France and India, and it just made me think about the difference between the relationship we can have as a family to property in the East and in the West. But as you said, there's very different, like there's lots of differences also within Europe, and I'm guessing also within India and China and Japan. So I was just wondering, because again, I'm speaking from a very, very French perspective, how could you explain that? Because of course, as a French, I'm just thinking that since maybe the revolution, the relationship to families toward the state has evolved. So family business is not really a thing anymore, I think, in France, at least. So how can we explain this, those differences? Because I don't think the state is the only answer. I took the example of China because there the role of the state is very heavy, important, but there's still relies on this ancient concept that I was talking about in my comments. So, you know, the filial piety, la piété filiale, we don't really have that concept also in French. We used to, I think, but not anymore. So I don't know. I was just wondering what elements can we have to explain those differences? But it's a
very
hard
big
question.
Yeah.
Yes, very big question.
I think explaining is really difficult because it's not obvious, for instance, why exactly inheritance rules vary so much. Traditional ones, pre-modern inheritance customs, vary so much within such a small space in Western Europe. The fact that they do is very important. Finding the explanation, maybe it's partly random, maybe it just happened that way, but it has contributed powerfully to shaping the world. I don't know if who among you is familiar with the work of the French demographer and anthropologist Emmanuel Todd, whose whole oeuvre, covering about 20 books, is all about how inheritance rules are basically the best way of understanding how a society works at the level of its anthropological subconscious. And this relates to what Kemi just said. One of the most striking moments in French history is when the 1804 civil code, imposed by an enlightened dictator, Napoleon Bonaparte, imposed the rule of equal inheritance between children as a legal requirement of the French state. This was the custom in some parts of France, but very much not the custom in other parts. And the uniformity imposed by the French state of inheritance rules, making all children equal, regardless of sex, regardless of birth rank, and regardless of pre-revolutionary custom, was transformative, including with respect to the organization of French farming and business and many other things as well, and had ideological implications. Todd interprets it as basically the concrete social matrix of the abstract idea of equality. If you want people to be equal, you have to show them to be equal where it really matters. And in peasant societies, what really matters is how the land is divided. And even if you're not an egalitarian by sentiment, if you live in a society where land is necessarily divided equally, then you're an egalitarian by practice. Willy-nilly, as one says in English, whether you want it or not. Willy-nilly being a rather weird English expression which translates the Latin volens nolens, whether you want it or not. Anyway, Poonam, what do you think about this? Thinking now perhaps not just of India, but of how India relates to other countries with different legal systems and different customs. How would you want to put what you were saying earlier in comparative perspective?
India has so much customs. It changes with every 20 steps, I would say. So making a comparison with the West, I don't think is possible. Every family in India is governed by its own principles. Every state in India and its family within are governed by its own principles. If I want to try to give a piece of advice to another family, they put me off. It is our family, it is our family matter, we don't want your advice. So that's how a family in India is. So when I talk about the rights of daughters or the behavior meted out to daughters in a family, so the states in North, there it's a very conservative behavior. It's very traditional, very orthodox behavior meted out to the girls. They are not encouraged to go to schools, have education. Whereas the eastern states of India, there you see the daughters are encouraged. The mothers are there behind them, protecting them, supporting them. Go, please, go complete your education, become a doctor, become an engineer, whatever you want. So that is the diversified family in India. In one state, they're just married off at the age of 10. Or even you don't know, in a very anterior village of Rajasthan or somewhere, the child marriage still goes on. The daughter is born and she's given up. Okay, fine. Oh my God, the bride has arrived. The groom is already there, who is a year old or a 2-year old. So that is how diversified our culture is, Indian culture is, our society, tradition. So all the families are so different from each other. Even my family and the family staying next door to me is different. So making a comparison and wanting a change or a uniformity, it's not possible in India, not in near future.
Sorry, can I just comment
Yes,
on
please.
that without obviously crossing your knowledge territory because you live there and etc. But I think this kind of goes into another area of human rights very much, because society or families ruling their own independent way, marrying the girl whenever and doing whatever, all that kind of stuff, even in Africa and in a lot of other places. I think even the Middle East until now, there's a lot of room for negative interpretations of this, and because sometimes family is power, but sometimes it becomes really a liability. In this case, all the marriages, forced marriages, the killings, all that kind of stuff, so the role of places like Amnesty International and those kind of people, or even UNESCO,
I agree.
Very important to to kind of say, right, yes, you have your own family dealings, but these are your red lines, because the individual legally has their own rights. And this is exactly why the individualistic approach, as patriarchal, as intense that system is, as ancient, with all respect to that, but there should be very clear limits there. Or let's say a third way, where the government doesn't have that abuse power, but at the same time the family doesn't have also the ultimate power. So there is always a third party or somebody. Like in England, for example, if you're getting in a divorce or something, you will have organizations call you and say, do you need anything?
Yes.
Are you okay? These are very important things. And I'm not saying this just in the sense that certain social hierarchy in a lower, let's say, economical way, but even in the higher, because there's a lot of abuse happens in the very rich families too. So yeah, maybe you agree.
That's where, when I said that if I go for being a lawyer, being an advocate, if I see something bad happening or something injustice or some inequality happening, and I go and try to mediate or give a piece of advice, they say, this is our family, you stay out of it. So
Yes,
so
but by law they have responsibility, and they would be in
there is
like
a child marriage act which says it is prohibited, right? Child marriage is prohibited, but executing that, enforcing that in such a huge population in India and in the anteriors, it becomes very, very difficult when it comes to the part of execution. You have barriers of villagers standing in front of a police party saying that no, this marriage will happen, even if it's against the law of India, and we will not let the police come inside the village to stop the marriage. So there is history. There is a dacoit, and there was a movie made in India, Bandit Queen. So she was a product of this child marriage, child abuse, raped by her in-laws, by her family members, and then she had to kill everybody who outraged her modesty, mutilated her, and she became a dacoit. She became a bandit. So there is a history in India, but things are happening, but happening very slowly because we are deep-rooted orthodox, if I may say that, orthodox to the core of orthodox. So we are really taking time to come up to that level where we give.
It's education, isn't it? There's the other thing where I watched a lot of things, and I'm in very close contact with people who work for rescuing for human trafficking, against human trafficking, and actually it's more. I mean, they're young girls, and they're almost their families sold them now. And I'm not talking particularly just in India. I'm pretty sure it happens everywhere else. You know, even here it happens. But the idea is that how is that structures and family system influencing all that kind of thing?
There comes the socio-economic part of the family, the socio-economic status of the family. So a poor family having 10 children and not having a land to till or a source of income, he has no option. But when somebody offers sometimes a family or a father is duped also that yes, we are here to marry your daughter, and
I know. Yes,
so then it's sold and sold and sold and sold. There comes the socio-economic status of a family. Even very good family.
Sorry
Yeah,
to interrupt.
please.
The law needs to be restructured.
Law is structure, but execution of law is pretty difficult here.
That means it has to be restructured in a way where you don't have a problem in executing. Is that possible? I'm not a lawyer. I have a lot of lawyer friends, but I'm not a lawyer.
No, because in India, justice can be delayed but not denied. So when I file a case, it goes on for years and years and years because justice has to be made at the cost of the death of the plaintiff or the petitioner who wanted justice. He may die, but the case goes on. So the system, the legislation, the executive, everything goes hand in hand. And with the population which is booming out of the earth, Indian population which is booming out of the earth, it will explode one day, it will explode. It really becomes the enforcement part, the execution part is still very difficult. There are people who are still fighting, who have got justice within the time limit as specified under the Act. And there are people who have not got justice because they don't have the resources, they don't have the economic support. Then, although we have organizations here who are constructed or constituted to support these kind of people, but they also have their hidden agendas. So it is all, I would say that, how do I support myself? First, I have to see, and then I will think about the other. Selfless attitude, service is not here in India because the population and the foul mouth to feed are too much and the income level is too less. I think Sonia would agree with that. I don't know how much.
Thanks. I don't want to cut you off. Just a reminder, we have 30 minutes left, which is
Please,
we have time to continue this discussion, of course, and it's a very important discussion. And actually, before Talin mentioned human rights, it was one of the things I was planning to say. So let's just frame it as a general question, and I'd like to hear Sonia's view on this in particular. The customs and traditions and cultural representations around families are very diverse. Legal frameworks are also very diverse for historical reasons and for other reasons. And indeed, social change itself is very diverse. There was a question in the chat from Juan Sastre from UNESCO about how changing non-traditional family structures impact on all of this, which is a good and difficult question. At the same time, human rights aren't negotiable by definition. They are the rights that people have simply by the fact of being human. And they do not depend on where you happen to be born, who happened to be your parents and how much money you have. And that tension between the sheer diversity of family traditions and structures and the unity of human rights raises some important questions, including for what the foundation wants to do. What do you think, Sonia? How do we balance that universalism of human rights and diversity of customs and practices?
To me, it's very simple. If we can manage that when it comes to United Nations resolutions on war, prisoner of war, being Ukraine's story right now in my head, or we have World Trade Organization, we can enforce and try to at least put some governance to manage that across different cultures. Why it cannot be done at the family level too, and especially these days when people of different cultures and religions are so mobilized and are not in the same region where their traditions come from.
I think there's an interesting frontier here from a legal perspective, which is also a very important cultural frontier between civil law and criminal law. And violations of human rights are typically treated as criminal violations, whereas the purpose of civil law is to regulate chosen relationships between people. And the civil law applies, of course, to commercial life as it applies to family life. And traditionally, everything to do with the family has been an area of civil law rather than criminal law. But in the 20th century, for reasons very connected to the rights of children, for instance, or the rights of spouses, the example of marital rape is a very important example here. It was something that didn't exist in law until about 30 years ago in the countries that started to frame it as a legal issue. But of course, as an issue of criminal law, not as an issue of civil law. And the criminal law has that ability, but perhaps also that weakness, that it depends on uniform, universal standards of unacceptable conduct, whereas the civil law is about regulating the diversity of conducts. On the other hand, if we're talking about providing legal frameworks for freely chosen ethical relationships, then maybe the criminal law is a very blunt sword and one that risks denaturing the relationships. So I'd be very interested in views on this, including yours, Poonam, as a lawyer, but also from the non-lawyers. The tendency to subject issues of major public concern to criminal law is very understandable, perhaps problematic. What are your thoughts on that? I don't see anyone asking for the floor. Darina, do you have any thoughts or comments on that as an international lawyer? Legal scholar.
Yes,
legal scholar.
yes. Okay, I was listening carefully to Tallinn and all the commands, and also this perspective of the Middle East. Being myself also a person coming from the Middle East, I can say that first to comment on some of what was being said. In fact, we cannot generalize, because today in the Middle East, we have, we have like many religions, many cultures, even if there is, still the strength of the Arab family. But I mean, the way how people live, the way how I mean, it depends on their own income. It depends on what is the country of residence is, what is their religion. So whether they are coming from, I don't know, from a specific country, or they are Muslim, or they are Christians. So all these these elements or these patterns affect how we can see or look at the family. Okay, although we have some commonalities, of course, but and some typical, I mean, aspects of the Arab family.
Correct. You misunderstood something. It's not about generalizing at all, because I understand that very well. It's about the general patriarchal and very backwards ruling, sort of unwritten even system that exists. That's how we do things. You know, of course, there are some rebels and individuals who want to do their own things, but it's very, very, very minor. So it's not as diverse as we think it is. Sorry to, I have to correct that, because, you know, it's never generalized.
Okay, Tallinn. Yes, I mean, because, for example, myself, I'm coming from Lebanon, but I know that in other countries, having many friends and family members in other countries, I know the mentality is different. So it depends. Of course, we have this strong-headedness of the father that is always present, and we can admit this, maybe in almost all countries. Yeah, but at the same time, we sometimes we witness in some families, like you know, like a matriarchal aspect also, because as if the mother is also within her own family is like the one who has the last word sometimes. So it's really it's not we don't have one aspect of that. Yeah.
No, but it's very particular of Lebanon, mostly also because of the war. I believe it's the civil war. It left a lot of mark on that, a lot of the absence of men as well. That's a very different, specific. Lebanon is a very unique case. I'm half, so I understand where you're coming from. But the matriarchy is very little compared to the other, you know, element, the patriarchy.
Yeah, of course. Of course, and regarding human rights, here we have a big problem, because if we are referring to the international conventions related to human rights, and you know all the conventions that we have for women, children, and the family in general, then we can really see a big, like large discriminatory provisions and practices that are related to family laws, especially. Women are not equal in this regard at all. In Lebanon, it's the case, because we are affiliated, you know, we refer to religious tribunals, to religious laws, in fact. So when it comes to marriage, to divorce, to guardianship, to property rights, the inheritance, all these things, then here we are not equal at all, and there are a lot of discrimination and violations of our rights. So this impacts a lot negatively women and girls and the family in general, and this also depends on where we are, which country we are talking about, whether we're talking about Lebanon or in Morocco, I don't know, in Palestine or Algeria, Egypt. So it differs. It differs when it comes to the laws related to divorce and that. But in general, we have the human rights are not really well respected, and I'm talking only about women's rights and in this field, but there are many other also human rights that are being violated in this regard. So and why is that? Because whenever there is an attempt, or like they want to try, or there is a pressure from the civil society to reform these family laws, it is taken as like it's a threat to our identity, our group identity, our religion, our you know, our culture. So it's not seen as really as a human rights issue and equality or gender balance or gender equality. It's not seen as in this as such, I mean. So so it's true that culture and all these things are really very heavy in the Middle East.
I think it's regressive, not progressive. That's exactly why. You know, so it applies to everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry to interject, but regressive and being progressive are really very subjective terms rather than being objective. For some family, they think that being that is progressive for them, and being outspoken is regressive for them, being independent is regressive for them. So the concepts and the definitions and opinions of a family differ, since we are basing our discussions on what family is, or what family is business or whatever. So regressive and progressive are very subjective terms for a family.
Going back to what Dorina said earlier, in every form of institution, ethics is the core. And if we look at ethics, or what John said, duty of care, that's what it makes the difference between me versus our duty towards others in a family.
Comes back to the moral.
I mean, the key point is that not everyone's going to agree about this within any particular country, and still less between countries. Within a country, the question is whether you can have a legal framework that can manage disagreements between people in a way that respects fundamental rights. And in the international sphere, the question is whether there are things that countries shouldn't do with regard to their international obligations. There's actually a very interesting legal discussion regarding the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, on the very technical question whether the reservations entered at the time of ratification by some countries, many of them Arab countries, but not only, are consistent with ratification. This is beyond my competence technically, but at least quite a few legal scholars feel that those reservations should not have been accepted because they actually void the substantive purpose of the convention. So this is a very hot area of international debate, both in very technical legal terms and also within the human rights mechanisms of the UN in Geneva. And within the specific treaty mechanisms of the various CEDAW committees and commissions that follow up on that convention. And similar issues arise, but I believe less complex ones legally, with respect to the Convention on Protection of Rights of the Child. So the attempts to codify an international legal framework in these areas have been contentious and difficult precisely because of the backdrop we've been discussing, of the sheer cultural diversity and deep rootedness of different understandings of families, including but not limited to the economic dimension of families.
John's here, somebody here from the team wants to participate. They have a question.
Yes, please.
Hi.
Please go ahead. I can't see you, but
I think we're just going to use this here.
Oh, hello there. I just want to circle back. Hi, it's my first time here.
Say your name.
I'm Matsuri from New York originally, but living in Tokyo now. And I just wanted to circle back about, I just got back from a trip from the Middle East actually. And I visited both Lebanon and Dubai. And I think what we were talking about, Lebanon is a very free kind of country. And I think it's more progressive than people give it credit for, perhaps. And even when I was in Dubai, I felt like it's quite an international city and most people are Muslim there. So it's very patriarchal and traditionally more conservative. But I feel like I saw a lot of female entrepreneurs, and I think the culture is getting progressive more and more, and empowering women. So that's what I saw while I was traveling the Middle East. So I think it is getting progressive.
Wait, can I ask something? Where in Lebanon you visited?
Oh yeah, we visited. It was in Beirut. I went up to Tripoli up in the north, and we went to Saida in the south, and Byblos, which is one of the oldest towns.
Byblos, here we have.
Are you?
Dorina is in Byblos.
Oh really? Wow. Yeah, I went to Byblos twice actually.
Here.
Oh, wow, that's crazy.
The International Center for Human Sciences is in Byblos, of which Darina is the director.
Wow. Yeah, Lebanon was one of my favorite countries that I've ever traveled to. Just the people are so kind and caring and giving. It was really wonderful.
And it's a very rich culture.
Very rich culture, yeah.
Mhm. And Dubai?
And share a little bit.
And what about Dubai? There were a lot of Europeans, of course, Americans, and right?
Yeah,
English.
mostly I saw a lot of Russians, a lot of Russian business people and British expats living in Dubai, also Qataris and Saudi.
Because I was there like 2 months ago. I work with Dubai a lot and with Qatar as well.
You
Yes,
were
but
there.
sorry.
Were you there in February?
No, I was there early March. Yes, for about a week this time. But I have very different impression to that because I find I don't know their families and their society, but I find it. I mean, the locals, not the those who come and go, and but I have a very unimpressed kind of impression of that. I don't find it it depends how you define progressive. I find it very much money centered only and socially very backwards. But that's not important. It's about the laws. The laws, it's more important than what we're talking about, that human rights and the laws. I don't think these people respect any of that, but I think it needs to revisit.
I would like to use one kind of yardstick to judge a given society. I think we need to stay very objective. If the idea is, let's say, just take one example, as John said earlier, family is for a place to provide survival and prosperity for all its members. If we just take that, and just for the sake of argument, how is a family protected if people through divorce, the money belongs to only husband and wife, and the children in the West are often suffering? And in the West, you can go through 3-4 divorces, or you can have children with many people, and so it's only the power of the parents, and the children may not have enough money left for their well-being. So we cannot judge Middle Eastern culture because there is 4 marriages. I was in the plane going to France, and this person sitting next to me from the Middle East made a comment. He said, in the West, you have polygamy by having one marriage after another after every few years. At least in our polygamy, we keep the family together. It's just to make a very strong argument, but there's a point to it. I'm not saying the idea of 4 wives is right, but the other side, to walk with a flag of purity and holding the flag of human rights at a higher level, is also not right. So we're constantly doing this comparison. We need to compare the core idea, not the points on the surface.
Sorry, when you say children, in what age are you referring?
And any age, the idea is their financial well-being, their prosperity. And if we say, earlier I was having a debate with one of the audience here, is children in very Indian form of family, as extended families, the money and the resources of the well-being belong to that whole family. And if in the West we say after 18, you don't have right to the resources that children participated in building, and they didn't choose to be born in that family, so they have the right to those resources. Why we think it's perfectly right that the resources are managed and at the whim of the 1 or 2 members of the family to use. that is not in the corporation, where if one of the senior person in the company uses a resources called embezzlement, and that's a criminal act. While, as John said, in family law, everything is just civil, conducted through civil law, the exact same act. So it's really hard to criticize, to just hear a criticism of a culture without discussing what human rights we are trying to protect. Let's just focus on the human rights protection.
Yes, when you say legally, for example, is it not, whoever is a lawyer there would correct us, is it not every child has a right already, even when the persons get divorced, the wife, they get as much money as many children as they have. Is that not correct in Western society?
Yeah,
No,
but typically that money is paid to the
that's
wife.
not correct.
But
The money should go to the children, not to wife or the husband. Children should have their own. If we can charge taxes to people, maybe we can also create a trust for the children from the beginning.
yeah, I think there were two questions. I think
Of the family.
Talene was asking what the legal situation is, and you, Sonia, were making a judgment about it. The legal situation is that the spouse receives the money for the upkeep of the children, and only for the minor or dependent children. So children that have attained financial independence and legal independence have no right against the property of the family from which they come, which is indeed unusual. In traditional societies, that probably would be less the case. On the other hand, as Sonia says, that money is paid to one spouse by the other, one ex-spouse by the other ex-spouse for the upkeep of the children, not paid to the children. Whether this is a messy compromise or an imperfect or that's a bit of a different discussion, but that's basically how the law works in practice.
I don't know if this is an exception, but I've seen Belgian families where after a divorce, after years, when the children become 18, the money starts going to their accounts, not their mother's account. That I've seen it. This is Belgian, but I'm not sure
if they're dependent, and in particular if they're students. And of course, one of the interesting aspects of the changes in family structures and family life is that children are remaining dependent on their parents much longer than in older societies. In fact, it's interesting because contemporary Western society is rediscovering patterns of dependence that were characteristic of much older agricultural societies, where children remained dependent on their parents until they married. And very often, at least some of the children would never leave the farm and therefore be dependent forever, literally. It was the tradition in Irish peasant families for one girl to be prevented from marrying, to stay on the farm and take care of the parents, for instance. But there's also been a traditional difficulty for boys to marry in peasant societies, particularly where the land was not equally divided. So there are lots of very interesting issues there. There was a famous French film, perhaps some of you have seen it, and I think it was remade by Hollywood at some point, called Tanguy, which is just a boy's name. And Tanguy was a very well-qualified graduate student, still living with his parents at the age of 28. And his parents basically had a nervous breakdown over the inability to get rid of him, to push him out the door, especially when they discovered he was making a lot of money from his personal activities, teaching and tutoring and so on, and contributing nothing to household expenses. So as legal, full legal citizenship, typically at the age of 18 in Western societies, becomes very detached from full social membership through financial independence, which can come very late in some societies, particularly with the cost of housing, which is very difficult for young people to deal with. There's this kind of unclear in-between space where people are dependent on their parents, but at the same time have achieved legal majority. And tax systems deal with this in very complicated ways. In France, basically, you can include a dependent child for tax purposes until the child is 25, maximum. But not all children are actually independent financially at the age of 25. If your child does 4 master's degrees consecutively, they might reach the age of 30 before they have a job. So anyway, very interesting issues with respect to how adult children are treated. But of course, the law was mainly defined and designed to protect minor children in practice.
But John, maybe I wasn't making myself clear. This is sort of the point I was trying to raise. Some of these laws were done when economics were much easier at 18 for somebody to be independent. And now in today's society, the independence of even good students or good young people is not that easy, because the gap between the rich and poor is increasing, and also just cost of livings that are increasing because a lot of people are moving more to urban settings where things are much more expensive. So as we are discussing about what laws should be changed, that's where I was raising this question. If we are talking about equal rights in a family, in today's idea of nuclear families, the rights are basically, and the idea of the family just basically between spouses. What I'm trying to say is, isn't it every family member has the right to that family equally, to its resources for their well-being and prosperity?
Yeah, I think in general terms that makes sense as a norm. The question is how to apply that in practice, given the unequal capacity of children to take care of their own interests. And in particular, one of the big challenges in purely legal terms is when a child is too young to take care of its own interests, who should be the guardian or the trustee? The default legal position in most societies is that parents are the guardians of their children. But if the parents are not fulfilling that role adequately for whatever reason, who else should be the guardian? And this is seen as an exception, and it's usually basically a judge or someone appointed by a judge to act as guardian, which means that the law intrudes in the family relationship. I suppose what you're looking for is some way of keeping it in the family, but still subjecting it to legal principles of equity and justice. And that's challenging because it's not the way historically things have been set up. Historically, keep it within the family when you can, and when you can't, some judge or social worker intervenes and takes it out of the hands of the family. What you're looking for is an alternative approach where you don't keep it all in the family, because the family is subject to ethical principles, but the protection of those ethical principles isn't taken out of the family to be put in the hands of a judge or a social worker either. And that's revolutionary, actually. It's a very different way of thinking about things.
As Poonam said, when there's dirty laundry that sometimes need to be aired, if it's not aired, there's imbalance of powers, don't allow people's rights to be fully addressed.
Absolutely.
And so
to
that's
just make
where
it
we are trying to find new ideas.
Who washes the laundry? That's a very gendered thing. So the image, the metaphor of washing dirty laundry immediately points to the issue of the gendering of family work. Absolutely. It's more than a joke. It's actually a very telling metaphor. If dirty laundry is to be washed, it'll probably end up being washed disproportionately by the woman, the wife, or the daughters. So there's something unfair about the way in which dirty laundry gets washed. But the alternative, again, which is built into the administrative structures of the modern state, is if the family isn't working, someone else should do it for them. So don't wash the dirty laundry in-house, send it to the laundry, send it to the dry cleaning or whatever, the judge, the social worker. But there's something troubling there too, in the idea that the family is either perfect or dysfunctional. Whereas most families are functional but imperfect. They occupy that in-between ground where basically the law doesn't really intervene. If the parents make a mess of it, so be it. Until you reach the threshold of intervention by social services. It would be very interesting actually to maybe have one of our future dialogues focusing on that, and maybe find some people with real experience of social work who could talk about the ways in which the law and public administration do intervene in families and some of the problems that that kind of intervention causes. Because it's, in order to, basically it's like the old joke, in order to kill the rats, you sink the ship. In order to save the family, you destroy it by substituting some form of legal authority for the family relationship. It may be the least bad solution in some cases, particularly in cases of abuse of children, of course. But even if it's the least bad solution, it's not a particularly good solution. Sorry, telling you, I'm rabbiting on here because we're coming to the end. But please,
yes, there's one last thing I see. This is relevant to what you said, but not necessarily relevant to what Sonia wants to say, probably, because I see a lot of situations in London just by observing as a spectator to those mothers with children, for instance. It happens a lot in poorer, let's say, families, you can see, and a lot of the it happens in all kind of colors and societies, let's say, but I see it more in the poorer sections. The way the mothers are treating the children, it's not necessarily violence or immediate breaking of the law, but it skirts so much on all that. Or the way the very badly treated children, I see it in front of me, the way they treat the child, the way they hit the child, the way the child has no shoes, that's 1 year dragging on the floors, and I look at them and I think, does social services or anyone need to intervene here, because this is really badly treated child? But unless it's like really getting beaten up many times and taken to the police or whatever, then no one intervenes. So that is very important, that gray zone. There's a lot of victimhood in that gray zone, which nobody actually looks, and that's a very big problem here in England. I don't know elsewhere, but that's, I like to say that. So sometimes I think these children have to be taken away from this mother, but I often see that, actually. I don't know elsewhere, but it's a very
elsewhere too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, this, of course, wasn't the subject of today's discussion, where we were focusing on the economics of family life. We might, in a future session, talk more about these issues of violence and abuse and so on. But of course, it's all part of one big picture of how to think about the family in ethical terms, which was the starting point of our discussion back in November, and the common thread of each of our discussions every month. Our time is up. Thank you very much for a really lively discussion that opened a lot of very interesting files to talk like a lawyer. We haven't actually reached a final settlement on any of the open cases, still to speak like a lawyer, but at least we've opened the cases and made clear that there are some really interesting issues that deserve further discussion, which is why this isn't a one-off dialogue. It's a monthly event, third Thursday of every month. And we're gradually accumulating knowledge and ideas and issues that will build towards both an analytical profile and an action profile for the foundation. So thank you. It was a really great discussion. Thank you for participating so actively and saying such interesting things. Sonia, do you have any closing words to close our session?
Yes, given it's already 9 o'clock, and I see many of the participants probably wanted to also get involved, and next time we'll try to use more of Q&A time. And just to conclude on this, as John said, we were trying to focus more on the economics part of the family, where survival and prosperity rights to that to all family members. And I just trying to leave some very provocative ideas is, if there is in France equal rights to inheritance was put in place, what about if children had the rights to family money equally from the beginning, not after the time of inheritance, but in a very, it will, without saying too long on this, then probably their rights will be better defended, because people who have the power of money have the power over the family. I will leave the idea at half so people can think about it, and then maybe we'll have a much bigger discussion in the future. And then talking about the next topic next month, it's extending the family. It's talking about nuclear families and how nuclear family versus extended families fit in the idea of family.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And certainly a future session on rethinking inheritance would be, I think, a very interesting discussion. So let's keep that for a bit later. And the question of the extended family is one that was already mentioned in this discussion. So it will be really very timely and very interesting to come back to it in May, third Thursday of May. Thank you very much. Nice
May
talking
9th.
to you all online, and I look forward, I
Thank
hope,
you.
to seeing you
Thank
again
you, John.
in one of these future dialogues. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you,
Everybody
Goodbye.
joining us.
Thank you. Goodbye.